Hey everyone, in this video I'll be showing you an OP SMERT build, Immortal Shell 2. We'll be using weapons as well as you can also do a setup where you just use your fists, although I'll be talking about using this for the normal game as well as into New Game Plus, as there are a bit of differences between the two. And the only issue being SMERT is not very tanky. But one of the nice things about SMERT is that he's very front-loaded with his abilities that are really good here. I do want to mention though that using the kick and Last Vow is a good playthrough throughout like the mid to like late game. It does start to fall off near the end, but this is because the punches just do 20 damage and you can upgrade your weapons an infinite amount of times later on, which means they're just going to fall off when there's things like the duality stone. So I actually prefer to not use this, although I had a lot of fun because using Last Vow actually makes your punches and kicks stagger enemies, which is pretty useful, but the only downside is the damage isn't high enough to warrant it. Here's a bit of a better showcase. So you can go in with the kicks here, and the punches will sometimes stagger enemies like the weaker ones here, but you can see I'm doing not a whole lot of damage. Like that does take a lot of punches to take out these weak enemies. Versus using the Axatana here, which just does a whole lot more damage and can apply statuses, which is just a lot more smooth, especially when there's things like stasis here, which will slow enemies down, making this a lot easier. So yeah, later on, it's much better to go with a weapon. But the big thing about this build is we want to leverage his two special abilities. Deadly Revelation, which makes it so that he gets Faith, increasing the amount of resolve that you get from your punches, and then using Miracle here, which will sacrifice our health, but this is actually pretty solid because we can do insane damage and apply a random condition whenever Chaos expires, which is what we do with our punches. So, my opinion, the best points to put in early game is an overtime here. So basically what this does is it's going to make your Miracle last longer, so our special ability lasts 3 seconds longer before we go into overtime, which drains our health. We don't really want that, but it can set up some of our other benefits. I like to go here to the 5 seconds longer. You can go all the way to 4 points here, just a very costly shell points where we could put those into better positions. Now after this, I would recommend going to tier 2 because then we can take Fervor here, which is going to make it so that Faith will start at 20, 25, or 30%. So this is much better because we're going to get that resolve back a lot quicker. And trust me, it's actually pretty easy to get 35% health because when we're using our Miracle here, we just go into it and lose health pretty quickly. But after that, there's a couple choices. I really like Striker here, which is going to increase the amount of Chaos stacks. And this is where we get a lot of our damage from. So maxing this out will give us additional 2 Chaos strikes here, and we'll give an additional 3 points of damage for every detonated stack. So this will further scale up our damage. And then we can also put points into Devotion here. So this will make it so that Faith resolves, gives us additional resolve. And then while Faithful resolve has a 20% chance to give us full resolve, which is amazing. Which does actually make Tenacity not really worth it because we're going to get resolve back quicker with Faith, which doesn't really make sense to take this to reduce the cost of it. This can be an okay choice if you just find that you're not able to activate Miracle very often, but I think it's better in the mid game to go with points into Last Vow for that fight stance and then some points into Kicker. What's nice about this is you don't have to worry about weapon upgrades, but this is something that we will have to keep in mind because this does fall off in its damage, and in New Game Plus it doesn't really do a whole lot of anything. But the cool thing about the kick is that these also apply Chaos stacks. They are slower for applying Chaos stacks, but they do apply them. But you can also have it so that the kicks will detonate your Chaos stacks immediately. And you can also have a chance that they'll double the amount of Chaos stacks before they detonate it, which can give a pretty big boost to DPS, but it's only a 15% chance, so you won't see that pop often. Now the last tier is honestly not like super amazing. That's why I say he's very front loaded. So you can go with points into Beatdown, which will give you your ground punch. You press X or square on PlayStation to be able to do this, which takes you out of your fight stance and does a bit of extra Chaos stacks. I don't find this worthwhile to take. It's good for mobbing, but really you don't want to take that for a setup like this. Faithful will give a splash damage around you when you heal. Not really good. The final one, Limitless, here is pretty solid. So while Miracle is active, for every 32 Chaos stacks, we get a chance to give ourselves more Miracle, which will give us a pretty good amount of DPS boost. This is really nice because it can give you some with some good RNG, a lot of extra damage, but you can also go points into Absolution here, which will give you some mitigation as well as healing. It doesn't scale very well into the later game. I do like Resilience though. Whenever you're at low health, you go to 25%, you get a 30% chance to negate a fatal blow, and it'll heal you instead. Not for much, but it's preventing you from dying. That's huge. So if you got the shell points to put into it, that's all the much better. Funny thing is, you only have to really go to tier 2 here, although I do like to go with the putting points into Limitless here because this does give us pretty good amounts of damage because it allows us to stay in our form a little bit longer. But if you got the points here, like I'm at level 50, so I'd be putting 3 into Overtime, 3 into Devotion, 3 into Fervor and Striker, a single into Absolution and Resilience, and then 2 into Limitless. If we were a bit higher level, I'd put 3 into this. Smurf is kind of silly, but as far as our Tarstones go, if you're doing the unarmed setup, a lot of these don't actually apply to it, so just a heads up on that. But the best choice, in my opinion, is to go with the Auspicious Stone for an increased crit chance by 18% with your melee attacks, as well as the Headsman Stone for an additional 100% crit damage. Huge. We also got the Marksman Stone to give ourselves increased crit chance, and the Berserkers, which is amazing on this setup because we get 165% extra damage when our health is below 50%, which is exactly what our ability does. So you're going to get that 165% health. This is a must-have stone to have in your support. So I like to roll with these 4 here. If you don't like the crit chance on your melee, you can go with like the increased stagger damage after killing an enemy, but it's not that great against bosses. Now, the reason that I like to use weapons so much is that we're going to use the Duality Stone here. So this is where the weapons come into effect because the Axe Katana is just an insanely powerful weapon. The Duality makes Axe Katana hit twice, so you're getting twice the resolve back with his ability. It becomes insane. The Axe and Dagger is another good choice. Typically in this game, it's the fast attacking weapons that are just a bit better. And I've also had really great success with using the Black Needle. So you can go with the Spear, Axe and Dagger, or Axe Katana, with my preference being the Axe Katana because it can get stasis to slow enemies down. Now for our ranged weapon, if you want to do a bit longer range, Forgotten Crossbow is great, but the Nail Shot is going to be our choice for the Tarstones I'll show you in just a minute. And I like to use the Untarnished Seal here, but it's personal preference. Some people really like the Infinite Seal, so you can go with that, or even Vatra Steel, which is probably the true best. Which then takes us again to this here, very powerful Duality Stone. Doubles the attacks, so if we do one attack, it counts as 2, gives us double resolve, gives us a crazy amount of damage. Great status buildup, it's super useful. If you don't like that, the Thief Stone can speed up any weapon by giving additional warp stacks, which increases your weapon attack speed, which is nice. Leech will give a bit more health, not my favorite here, but I like Duality Stone. And then I'll put on the Enfeebling Stone, which makes it so our projectiles will fly Fragile. Fragile makes them take bonus damage from weapon attacks, which can be pretty devastating. But there's also the Corroded Stone, which has some effects if you're using like the Trebuchet Axe. Personal preference comes down to there. Infusions. This is where things get really interesting. I like the Voltaic Crown for the lightning damage. This does damage over time and creates shockwaves, so it's great for mobbing. However, Torpor Stone is crazy. This is behind a waterfall in like the watery section before you fight Hexapod. This will give you stasis on hit. Stasis slows the enemies. It works great on bosses, works great on mobs, and it's really quick to apply when you use the Duality Stone and use the running attacks in the Axe Katana. Insane. Now, for our ranged one, I really like the Vile Tongue Hedron here because this is going to give Blood Curse. Only on critical hits, but that's what we have the crit chance there. What this does is insane amounts of extra damage. You can go with just the Burns. Burns good against just trash mobs. It makes them staggered, but doesn't do anything on bosses, whereas this just does crazy amounts of damage. So I like to use these 2 stones together. Now for our ability stone, the Shrike Stone gives us insane amounts of iframes, which is super useful. So I like to have this as a backup plan. There's some bosses late in the game where this will make you immune to all their attacks and some of their worst attacks in the entire game. So this is good to take. I'm also a fan of the Hexapod core here because when you use this, it's going to give you warp stacks, which makes you attack even faster. This is a later game item, but it's great because you can give yourself a really fast attack speed, which is obviously nice when we hit twice. So these 2 work great. I also like the Fusillade Stone here to give ourselves increased crit damage, and it works pretty good here, but Barrage Stone works well too. If you want to use these for your ranged weapon, I just prefer typically not to. And for active items, the Grisha Remnant obviously is really nice. If you put this as your passive, I have it as the active right now, but the passive just makes it so it spawns them in, and it is actually quite insane. You can have a lot of these summoning in. It's not great against every boss in the game, but it's useful. I also like the Mango, which can give you heals, super useful, and it lets you turn into a mango, which is kind of funny, but that's more so, I do have a video in the pinned comment on how to get that. The best ones would be to have active Moonshine and then passive Grisha Remnant. So what this looks like in combat, and especially for bosses, you want to use your ability here to go into this. This does take you down to half health, but that's where some of your special abilities come into effect here. So we just want to start wailing away. You can see your progress bar at the bottom there. It was bad, I completely missed. Tracking was off. So just make sure you try to keep a bit of a distance from enemies. You'll start to take damage once that passes the threshold, and then you activate it there. We got Frost off on the enemies, which is amazing. And then the Grisha Remnants, because we attack so often, just does a lot of crazy damage. So again, that's why we don't want to use the ability to go and punch only, because we miss it on a lot of things. Afterwards, you can heal. That's going to give you a bit of extra survivability, but if you're confident, you can just go without, because some of the attacks here are actually really devastating, and having that extra damage helps. We need to get as much fervor back, or we got to get our resolve back so we can cast this again. It is a costly one, so that is one thing. Being faithful can reduce the cost, but that's only if you have a certain option picked, and it's not that amazing. So you want to typically just get into a habit of using this and then spam the attack here. See it not spinning around, that's perfect. Watch the bar at the bottom of your screen. You can also let your health drop. We try to get those 100 stacks as much as possible, so that's why the final thing is great. But that allows us to then activate it, and we have these huge amount of grishes that come out from that as well. So yeah, this becomes pretty crazy. You also have the shotgun here, which is nice because we applied the blood curse on there, so that can give some crazy damage. We then have stasis on our blades here. So we're very strong when we're using our weapons because the axe katana is really good. And then you just go into this mode here, beat them up. You can sometimes get lucky and punch two of them at the same time, especially if they're grouped up together. You can actually angle this really well to get a double effect off. So you can see there we got 21 punches on, or 27 stacks on the other guy, which is just enough to be able to lay that down. You can see there we have a bunch of grishas. But yeah, that is an OP build for SMERT in Mortal Shell 2. If this video is useful, please hit the subscribe button below. I hope you guys all have an incredible day, and we'll catch you all in the next one. I got a bunch of guides for all the different characters in Mortal Shell 2, so you can check those out and do some crazy stuff in this game.